Hello, everybody. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We have a good one for you, as always, on the show today. Economics for Kamala Harris. She gives her first speech. We'll take you through everything you need to know about her economic policy. Actually, good to see her getting out and giving some policy pronouncements. Also, we've heard so much from so many different perspectives, from the Israeli perspectives, the many Palestinian perspectives, but one thing we haven't heard is from an average man on the street in Gaza and what the last 10 months have been like as a kind of comprehensive series of events and how it affects somebody emotionally. Mondoweiss has a great piece out, from a guy who started off this genocide as a normal guy, but then because of all the suffering, because of all the tragedy that he saw around him, decided to pick up arms and defend his people from the ongoing Israeli genocide. We'll take you through how he got to where he got to. And a really crazy thing that I wanted to cover for a long time, Andy Levin and Sanjukta Paul. Andy Levin actually was formerly in the House. They have an article out in Jacobin Magazine about exactly what is going on with a real, I'm going to say, sabotage attempt by the UAW Federal Monitor on the union. We'll give you the full breakdown on that to end the show. All right, so I want to start off with this here from Robert Kuttner in the wonderful American Prospect website, talking about Kamala Harris because she had a big moment. She gave her first major policy speech, and it was about the economy. There's a lot of big kind of headlines about it. We will break it all down. So, as widely previewed, she gave her first major economic address today. Two key themes were cutting housing costs and resisting corporate price gouging of consumers, which, funnily enough, I've seen a lot of kind of back and forth online in the culture. It's always interesting to see how things play on online, in less kind of explicitly political spaces online specifically. And it's going to be very interesting because there is this very strong current of it's not appropriate in any way for the market or for the government to get involved in the market and try and dictate prices. And that to Americans who have this genetic kind of anti-communist, tick, I think, deep within their souls. Something just, especially older Americans who are very much, in tune to the politics of Reagan and very much still think that that is the dominating, ideology and the ideology that we need to, take forward. That very much perturbs them, even though they've spent, pretty much everyone has spent the last, 2 years, 3 years complaining about the increasing price of goods. And we have seen more and more how much greedflation, some say almost 2/3 say that, greedflation is behind it. And, it is really quite an incredible thing to see Kamala Harris now taking some charge and saying, hey, you know what? I want to get this done. I want to take on the corporations that are totally doing all this price gouging and actually, make some progress on that. So, she also proposed destroying the refundable child tax credit and topping out at $6,000 a year for new parents in the first year as a baby bonus. So, right there, the ball is in your court there for J.D. Vance, who had recently said that he wanted to keep the child tax credit as a way of kind of getting out of his childless cat lady comments that he made recently. So the toughest of these policy ideas is housing. Unless the federal government spends massive sums to increase the supply of affordable housing, the cost of both rental and owner-occupied homes will continue to outstrip incomes. In the absence of a supply strategy, Harris's proposal of $25,000 subsidy for first-time homebuyers, though beneficial, will bid up prices. Her commitment to build 3 million new affordable units over 4 years using a mix of tax incentives and grants to local governments for innovative approaches is a decent start, but only a start. Two other good housing ideas that chime with her attack on predatory corporations are measures to remove the tax advantage from Wall Street speculators in housing and stopping predatory AI tactics for raising rents. And that was something that we talked about with these AI kind of algorithms that were used to determine people's exact willingness to pay based on their background and based on where they live. Well, obviously it's going to be based on where you live, but really based on kind of unique characteristics about everyone in the market, using an AI to create, raise the rents artificially across markets and across cities and across demographics. And that is something that she absolutely was very much right to tamp down on. Harris's general emphasis on price gouging is a policy area where government can make a huge constructive difference without spending large sums. It's good economics and smart politics on several counts. First, it vividly connects the issue of inflation where ordinary people feel it. Grocery store prices have increased only slightly over the past year, but consumers remember exactly what a quart of milk or a dozen eggs cost before the supply shocks of the pandemic. In addition, the supermarket profits are notably higher than before the pandemic, which means prices should have been moderated more. And let's hear it now from the horse's mouth. So this is Harris actually talking about her plans on price gouging, which I think is going to be very important because that is a very, very good political solution to a problem that clearly has been growing. It's almost surreal to watch a Democratic president come out, name, blame, and shame these corporations to lower the prices and point out the fact that they've been unnecessarily raising prices since the pandemic almost nonstop.
As Attorney General in California, I went after companies that illegally increased prices, including wholesalers that inflated the price of prescription medication, and companies that conspired with competitors to keep prices of electronics high. I won more than $1 billion for consumers. So believe me, as president, I will go after the bad actors. And I will work to pass the first ever federal ban on price gouging on food. My plan will include new penalties for opportunistic companies that exploit crises and break the rules, and we will support smaller food businesses that are trying to play by the rules and get ahead. We will help the food industry become more competitive because I believe competition is the lifeblood of our economy. More competition means lower prices for you and your families. Now compare what Donald Trump plans to do.
Yeah, so then she kind of goes on there to talk about Trump and talk about what he's going to do with the national sales tax, which is, something, he's got lobbyists of every type, shape, and form, including with the food industries, in his government or in his campaign or in his orbit, especially in his policy department. So that is something that really does influence his policy, and you see it there. And it's a very, very smart kind of thing, and it'll be interesting to see how heavily she goes after that in office, because it is not something that is going to go away. There's going to be continued raising of prices, and definitely not any movement to put the prices back down or kind of make them more in line with pre-pandemic profit margins, without any sort of major government action. And if Harris, if she has the conditions to do it, if she has the will to do it, I think that would really set her apart from pretty much every. Nixon was the last person to try, price controls, and it is really clear that there is room there, which is very, very smart for her to do because of just how big, big companies have, especially in the food department and the food sector, I guess you could call it, profits have really exploded since the pandemic. So there clearly is room to work with there. The plan, Kuttner here goes into saying in the prospects, the plan reframes the issue from whether Biden or Trump was better at containing an abstraction known as inflation to how concentration opportunistically drives price hikes. The right remedy for that ill is not slowing the economy generally, as the Federal Reserve has done, but going after the root cause. This is also a useful shot at the Fed's bad. So really, again, buying into what we have said on this podcast for a long time, which is essentially, it's not going to be, you're not going to just solve it, but it's not a wage price spiral that we're looking at here. It is very much corporate interests that have taken the money that was so much in the system, through PPP loans and other things, and use that for massive profits, but taken also advantage of this inflationary environment to drive up the prices. Now everyone's like talking about inflation. We could just kick up the prices, 10-15%, year over year, and it won't be that much of a big deal because everyone would assume, it's inflation, and they'll just blame it on Joe Biden or something. So Harris very belatedly is saying no to that with this policy and his pledge to go after big price gouging companies and supporting more competition from lower levels, which is, a very, very encouraging situation. So, the plan also recasts the struggle as ordinary people versus predatory corporations rather than impersonal forces, with Harris in the role as the champion of the beleaguered consumers. This is a pretty damn good position to be in. Is Harris right on the economics? Well, a detailed study by Groundwork Collaborative found that corporate concentration and increased profits accounted for more than half of inflation felt by consumers in 2022 and 2023. Harris's economic program looks much more like the one Biden began, which is encouraging because there was a lot of people. Tony West, very close to the business world, is one of her top advisors. She's been under a lot of pressure to fire Lena Khan, and it really looks like Biden, Harris is going to use the muscle of being someone who's not an 82-year-old man to push through this Biden agenda that he just was not, physically too weak and also politically too weak to push through, which is good. So we're also talking about housing. Let's hear Harris quickly on the housing situation.
And let's talk about the cost of housing. So now, the housing market can be complicated, but look, I'm not new to this issue. As State Attorney General, I drafted and helped pass a homeowner Bill of Rights, one of the first in America. And during the foreclosure crisis, I took on the big banks for predatory lending with many of my colleagues, including Roy Cooper, and won $20 billion for California families when I was Attorney General. So I know how to fight for people who are being exploited in the housing market. And I know what home ownership means. It's more than a financial transaction. It's so much more than that.
So by the end of my first term, she says, we will end America's housing shortage by building 3 million new homes and rentals that are affordable for the middle class. And I think as we kind of see here, she will have to do probably a little bit more than that to actually get through and really make a big dent, in terms of just on the supply side, in terms of loosening a lot of these regulations. And it'll be interesting within that to make sure that a lot of those are affordable and not these just, big luxury monstrosities that so many people in the YIMBY, build everywhere, build as much as possible department, always want to build. But there also, needs to be a loosening of the restrictions on the NIMBY side because, the moment you want to build any sort of, large apartment in any sort of nice area or any sort of just livable area, everyone in the area just seems to freak out. And that is something, all these regulations, all this red tape does need to be cut. And, on the other side, the subsidy side, I think it is definitely a good start. And we'll see, if she's able to put this into place. We'll see how she's able to do it. And again, with the Democrats, so much of the question is, do they have the will, do they have the political strength to put through what, could be otherwise good ideas or just beginnings of good ideas? So, I say this falls in the second category, beginning of a good idea, but it'd be interesting to see if she has the ability to put it through. So again, $25,000 in terms of first-time home buyer subsidy is one of the top liners on housing, commitment to build 3 million new homes and rental units. And on top of that, she is also loosening some of these regulations and some of this kind of NIMBY, you can't build in this area, red tape, which is going to be pretty interesting. Some of the suburban areas, a lot of people, may not like that, but I think it is very, very necessary in terms of just fixing this housing shortage But, may cost her with some of the new base of the Democratic Party. Definitely something to watch. But anyway, if she wins, Kamala will have more freedom to define her own politics and her own program than any president in recent memory because she doesn't really owe anybody. She abruptly became the Democratic nominee without having to cut messy deals to win primaries and quickly enjoyed near universal support. Her financial backing is also broad, so as the usual interest groups have no IOUs to call in. So if she does bring Congress with her, Harris could be a great progressive president. Given the massive tilt of the American economy to corporate elites in recent decades and the cost to ordinary people, progressivism is overdue economics and smart politics, especially on the price gouging and the building of more houses. One other noteworthy aspect of Harris's emerging progressivism is his paradoxical connection to race and gender. Barack Obama, the first black president, was uneasy about triggering the angry black man trope. Faced with the most severe economic crisis since the Great Depression, Obama pulled his punches, did not attack Wall Street, and brought back the team whose policies of anything goes had caused the collapse. Harris flips that script. The more she champions the defense of working people against corporate predation, the more the spotlight is on her policies and less on her race and gender. We need Harris not to be the first black woman president, but to be the next great progressive one. And that's a great way to end it there from Robert Kuttner. And on now to our next story. I really want to get into this one because I found it quite interesting. It's a testimony that was given to Mondawais, and just a resident of the Shujaiya refugee camp recounts recounts his motivations for wanting to join Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades to fight against the Israeli army. So it starts in December in both Yusuf and Masera refused to evacuate the Al-Shujaiya neighborhood in east of Gaza City, which was under siege by Israeli forces, although they encouraged their families to flee south. By June, Al-Shujaiya was undergoing its second Israeli invasion, and Yusuf, not his real name, and his friend were staying on Al-Mansura Street. They were the only ones there. Both tried their best to hide from Israeli drones that blanketed the sky. Yusuf and Masera understood the danger they were in, not only because everything that moved in the area was a target for Israeli drones, but also because Masera was a resistance fighter with the Qassam Brigades, the military wing of Hamas. Yusuf isn't a member of Qassam Brigades and has not participated in the fighting directly, but he is still a member of the Hamas movement and wants to help out in any way he can. And he's also Masera's best friend. In mid-July, Masera was exposed to one of the Israeli drones, which immediately targeted and killed him. From that point on, Yusuf would continue to move around Al-Shujaiya. He considered himself a caretaker of the abandoned neighborhood. If he found someone dead in the street, he would retrieve the bodies and make sure they got a proper burial. If possible, he would take them to their families or inform the families of their deaths. He also patrolled the streets to protect the area from looting. But beyond that, what he really wanted to do was be recruited by Qassam brigades to fight the invaders of this neighborhood head on. He stayed behind in Al-Shujaiya solely for this purpose. At the start of the war, he and his family had been displaced several times, running from death from one place to another within Gaza City. He belongs to a family of 7, and when they all chose to evacuate to the south in December, he decided to stay behind with some friends, many of them also in Hamas or supporters of the movement. Some, like his friend Masara, were also resistance fighters. Yusuf's story is representative of the countless others in Al-Shujaiya and across Gaza who have joined the resistance against Israel's genocidal attack or are supporting it in any way they can. So, the Israeli army launched its first invasion of Al-Shujaiya on December 4th and engaged in a protracted battle with the Qassam brigades over 3 weeks of fighting. The Israeli army suffered heavy losses, and the Qassam brigades broadcast images of the fighting, capturing footage of burning Israeli tanks and military vehicles. Yusuf and a few of his friends didn't engage in the fight, but they tasked themselves helping out with the resistance fighters by bringing them food and providing human reconnaissance and informing them of the army's movements. They weren't given any orders, but they did it of their own accord. All of them had grown up in the same mosque circles, an important component of Hamas's social base. And by the way, if you're talking about de-radicalization, this is literally, as the United States intelligence has even said, is fueling Hamas. The stuff that Israel's doing, the fact that, best friends are being killed and there's undescribable horrors and massacres every single day. That stuff is going to get more members to Hamas, whether you like it or not. And, honestly, can you blame him? If you see your grandmother killed, your best friend killed, the general stuff that Gaza's been dealing with for the last 10 months, and you're a man with a family and you feel, you got to, stand up for your family, stand up for your people, stand up for your country. What else is going to be your logical conclusion there? What else is it going to be? I should just die. that's what I want to do. I just want to give up. That is not, I'm sure it was the conclusion to some people, and fair enough for them, but it's also a lot of people are not going to want to take it lying down. So Yusuf used to notice that many of the fighters would gather in front of a restaurant in the neighborhood, and from there, they would go out on missions to engage the Israeli forces. They then returned to the same spot afterward before dispersing. I saw fighters coming back from the battles. I was inspired by the courage they had. They fought fearlessly like true heroes, Yusuf explained in testimony. He's almost like, almost like a Hamas groupie here. Yusuf explained in testimony shared with Mondoweiss, they were losing everything to defend their homeland and their people. Most of them died, but some are still fighting, and they haven't retreated. In mid-December, Yusuf watched a group of 5 Qassam fighters returning from a mission. An Israeli drone had followed them, and within seconds, 3 missiles were fired on the group, killing them all. Yusuf was only 200 meters away. He and a group of his friends later gathered their remains and gave them a burial. After the 5 fighters had been killed, it was reported that the army targeted their homes with missiles, leveling them to the ground. And again, those are civilians. Those are women and children. Whenever I got the chance to meet up with them or spend time with them when they weren't out fighting, I knew what I wanted to do next. I want to fight like them. No one from the Qassam brigades had ever approached him about recruitment, but he was content to wait and make it known through his social circles that he was available and willing whenever the need arose. But maybe it's not the time for me, he said. On December 26th, the army pulled out of Al-Shujaa, announcing that it had dismantled Hamas's military infrastructure in the neighborhood. But 6 months later, the army was back in Al-Shujaa yet again, fighting a second battle. Hamas had regrouped its forces and reconstituted its fighting capabilities all across the northern half of Gaza. This time, the fighting was even more fierce in the first round, as Qassam fighters launched RPGs, planted IEDs, and set up ambushes for Israeli forces from Jabalia to Shujaa. Yusuf had remained in Al-Shujaa this entire time, moving about and trying to be of use in battle. If not directly, then at least he could provide as much material support as possible. In one of his speeches during the war, Hamas's military spokesman, Abu Ubaidah, said that resistance had recruited thousands of people to replenish their thin ranks. Thousands more are still waiting to join, Abu Ubaidah said. Yusuf still held hope that he would be one of them. He prefers it to consistently being on the run from death. The occupation has killed everything we know, Yusuf said. It gives us more reason to fight. After 2 weeks of fighting during the second Shujaa invasion, the Israeli army retreated again and to declare victory, but left behind destroyed tanks at the entrance of the neighborhood. Videos released on social media showed as much in the invasion's aftermath. Yusuf said that the Israeli army had destroyed all of his neighborhood. We want life and safety, but they continue to exterminate us. They want the death of all Palestinians. Israel thinks that it's terrorizing us with its crimes, but we no longer want anything except for revenge for the blood of our people. We want revenge for the people Israel killed and let their flesh be eaten by dogs in front of us, and we could not save them. They shot everyone and anyone on sight. This is a criminal army. We must confront it. Everyone on our land must fight until we eradicate it. And that's why, I think if you listen to people, there are probably some people out there who believe the whole line of, we need to destroy Hamas to de-radicalize the Gazan population, all that stuff. The radical thing is watching as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid playing soccer on the beach and watching your best friend get struck with a missile right in front of you. That is the radicalizing thing. The radicalizing thing is going out for, just like the story we talked about in the last show, going out to register the birth certificate of your 2 newborn twins, and you come back and they're gone. Think about how that guy's feeling. If I were him, I know I would want to pick up a gun and fight back because, as he says, they have killed everything they know. They've killed any sense of normalcy and life for the people of Gaza, and it puts them in a position where they only get more and more radicalized. And we've seen the radicalization on the Israel side. So, this is I hate the term, cycle of violence. But honestly, the big thing is, it's not a cycle of violence. It's violence breeding a, smaller wave of violence. But the cycle, I guess, in that sense, it somewhat is. But I think it's very clear and important to say, the cycle is coming from the occupation, the existence of Israel as a Jewish supremacist state, and all that, and it seems to be quite unwilling to go anytime soon. And the U.S., even though they do know it and have reported it before, seem to be completely fine letting it, develop and grow as its cancerous, tumorous self unabated. All right, so this is absolutely a wild story here. This is by Andy Levin and Sanjukta Paul, who are two former labor lawyers. In the House, Andy Levin was in the House of Representatives as well, pro-Palestine as well. As Michigan lawyers involved in labor law and policy, they write, "We were shocked to see that the federal monitor overseeing the UAW's return to good governance, because, of course, the UAW, the United Auto Workers Union, had a federal monitor from the Department of Justice appointed to essentially this one guy supervising them. And if this one guy thinks that they are, up to no good because before Jean Fain, their leadership was incredibly corrupt. I think 2 or 3 of them had to go to jail. So hence the appointment of the federal monitor. The federal monitor now is really twice commented on the union's positions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So UAW has come out in front of or for a ceasefire in Gaza, and the federal monitor, which is supposed to monitor, union corruption, taking special vacations from the company in exchange for worse contracts, bribery, all that stuff, like literally stuff that the old UAW bosses did. Like that is what the federal monitor is supposed to be looking out for. Instead, this, they're weighing in on, don't call for a ceasefire. That's bad. The matter is completely outside of the monitor's scope, and its improper interference in the union's affairs calls into question his ability to continue to serve effectively in this role. So a U.S. federal judge in January 2021 enters a consent decree, a negotiated court-authorized settlement to resolve fraud and corruption charges filed by the Department of Justice against the UAW, several of its officers, and management figures at Chrysler, which is now Stellantis. The civil and criminal charges concern kickbacks, bribery, and other wrongdoing among certain union officers and corporate managers, constituting clear misuse of unions, funds, and members' trust. That consent decree led the court to appoint this lawyer, and the election of Sean Fain, obviously as a kind of direct election of UAW leadership for the first time, has led to Sean Fain's leadership, and no other way of putting this, pretty incredible wins for UAW members since then. On December 1st, though, 2023, this is where it all went wrong for the UAW, at least in the eyes of the federal monitor. They joined other unions in calling for a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza and announced that its executive board had voted to form a divestment and just transition working group to study the history of Israel-Palestine, the union's economic ties to the conflict, and explore how to achieve a just transition for U.S. workers from a war to peace. The union explicitly tied this move to its social justice history, including mobilizing against the apartheid South Africa and the Contra War, and standing for justice across the globe. The UAW announcement was politically significant, as the union had been a powerful messenger supporting Joe Biden's economic agenda. Biden made history by joining striking auto workers on the picket line, and while Fain has been steadfast in criticizing former President Donald Trump and rebuffing Trump's attempts to present himself as a friend of workers, that the union took an anti-war stand implicitly critical of the president may have carried some extra weight. Of course, whatever positions the union might take on social justice issues have nothing to do with the mandate of a monitor appointed to ensure compliance with norms of financial organizational probity. What's more, the legitimacy of the monitor's own position depends on his own probity in sticking to his mandate, lest it seem a federal official is interfering in a union or other organization's internal affairs or trying to influence it inappropriately. Yet the Detroit News reported that the monitor could not help taking advantage of a position of power to meddle in a policy matter evidently of personal interest to him, but unrelated to the court order. According to emails between the union's attorney and the monitor called Fain to express concerns on a strictly personal level, which is funny because, again, this guy has the power of life and death given to him by the DOJ over the UAW. So he calls Fain, just on a personal level, I'm not too thrilled with you calling for a ceasefire. Let's dispense with this notion of a communication about union policy being strictly personal. The monitor and Fain had, to our knowledge, no personal relationship outside the scope of the monitor's duties. They did not grow up together, work together, socialize together, or anything of the kind. Even if they had such a personal relationship, once the monitor was appointed, communicating about union business outside the scope of his mandate could not be characterized as personal, given his immense power over the union and its leaders. We concur and note the irony there right here of the situation. The consent decree that defines the monitor's work is aimed at rooting out precisely the sort of distortions of organizational integrity that could result from the monitor's meddling. The monitor has acknowledged the union's position on U.S. policy in the Middle East is beyond its purview. Therefore, there is no dispute in this. The impropriety results from the combined effects of this fact with the massive and largely discretionary power he holds over the union and its ability to function in other ways. So, the court here is this has been challenged by these two lawyers, and they are essentially advocating for the court to come in and say, at least issue a declaration saying that this was inappropriate for this monitor to do, and he needs to stick to his script, stick to his mandate the next time, or there will be further consequences, and the court can, on its own, provide oversight of the UAW at this point, which I think is, a perfectly fair situation because the contracts have not been in the favor of big business, as they were in the past. So that problem certainly does not exist. The only problem that they, would seem to have any sort of issue with is the fact that they are calling for, this personal federal monitor who has expressed, quite pro-Israel beliefs, which is his prerogative, but it's not his prerogative to bring it into his job. He expressed personal beliefs in the past that are pro-Israel, and he just has to stick to it in the future, which I think, should be the bare minimum. The UAW is rising as such a powerful force and real leader in the labor movement, and this is a critical story because we need to make sure that the integrity of it is protected, and we continue to see it rising and, continuing to do important and critical things as well, like calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. All right, hope you enjoyed today's show. We'll be back on Monday with more. It's Newsflash.